Philosophers talk to our times. How do you live in a dystopia? It is, of course, an utter truism to say we live in a post-truth society. And it's been a truism, I suppose, since the publication of the postmodern report, most modern condition, a report upon the state of knowledge by Lyotard in the early 70s. And all of that crowd. The problem, of course, is what does it actually mean? I mean it isn't at all obvious to me. And it wasn't obvious to Lyotard or to the reader what the post-truth society looked like. And that was, of course, its truth. That was, of course, its point. But let me explain. You see, one way of understanding, of coping with living in a world where AI endlessly creates fictive versions of the world and feeds it to us as if it was true. Or you look at a report and wonder, exactly who's sponsoring that report? Who's telling us that sugar is good for us after all? And why? And who's paying for it? All that stuff. And it's then terribly easy to conclude that there is no truth out there. There is no real world out there. And then to retreat into the most dangerous bubble of all. And do what humans do at such a point, as Hume noted. To be motivated purely by their feelings and their values. And to think then the world in the end dissolves into what they feel it to be. And to the strength of their feeling. And once you do that, of course, you are 9/10 down the way to becoming a citizen of a true dystopia. Less dystopia and more hell. As in the name of feelings, humans turn themselves into living devils. And always have. And probably always will. So, the problem is with a post-truth society is that it wants to understand the lack of truth in the same way that certain atheists understand the lack of God. As if that God itself was the truth. As if the lack of God, was itself the God. And so the post-truth society wants to understand the lack of truth, as if that is the truth. But of course it isn't. That's the point. That was the point of Derrida, bless him, in grammatology. It was not that everything was relative. Derrida's not a relativist, not like that. Merely that the way we understand the world is caught in endless systems that seal back on themselves and don't open out onto each other. They understand each other in terms of registers, movements, that are more Leibnizian than anything else. Leibnizian in the sense that Leibniz has an absolute divide between the world of matter that he doesn't really believe in, but can argue as if it was true, and the world of the inner monad, who carries its truth within it. Likewise, within Derrida, the way we orchestrate truth is enmeshed within the sea of symbols and signs, all of which refer to other symbols and other signs. And there is no point you can't escape that particular frame. No moment then that the truth breaks through, only more wordplay. And the endless delay that words have of saying, well, I'll prove it in a bit. That's all philosophers do in the end, parking a topic and pretending it's gone away. But that doesn't mean, and that means then for Derrida, notions like perception are simply badly thought. The idea then that you are there, looking out upon a world, perceiving it, seeing its truths or even its lies. That somehow then, you represent that world to yourself as something external to it. And that somehow that represents something of its truth is bunkum. Fair enough. The point about a Derridian argument, or the point about where this argument goes, I think I'm going to put it that way. I'm cautious about saying it's a reading argument because it's not quite. But the point about, for me, where this argument goes is the ultimate Spinozian deduction. Truth lies because I am in the world. I am part of its truth. I am part of then the shift and the change of a constantly evolving, but not evolving in one direction, a multipolar evolutionary world. And that is the truth. It's not then that there isn't things beyond us, merely that the way they create and recreate us is unstable, is by definition not fixed. You need to understand then the events of the world, the what actually happens, not in terms of matter, of how your brain would hold it down and say, this happened then, but rather events that might have a date or a time, as Deleuze certainly says, but exist more like white holes or black holes, things that gather you up within them, that are in the middle for another, in the middle for us, so that our lives are caught in the constellation of such events, be that the Battle of Hastings, or more recently the genocide in Gaza. We're always caught up in these events, being forced to tailor, manage how or what we are in their light. But great events have a date and a time, but no inner truth. Oh, things certainly happened, horrific things, horrible things. But what that means, how you resolve it, and exactly what happened is always more complicated, always part of other stories. And so, with great events, they do not speak a simple truth, but rather in myriad voices. How you understand the atrocity of Gaza, the attempt to wipe out an entire people, becomes then an infinitely textured affair. Whether you understand it as a generations understand it, as the moment at which they become radical, at the moment at which the scales fall off their eyes, and they see actually that since the Second World War at least, all imperial powers on the West have committed endless genocides in the name of freedom, peace, or security. Genocides that have only made the world worse. Whether you then understand that, which I certainly would be the truth I would follow, or whether you understand it in terms of a very different set of conflicts, as I have had friends who I lost to fascism would certainly understand it, as something caught up in some mythic war of Christendom, and place it back in the same light as the Crusades, and see it as somehow justified in the face of an existential threat, or if not justified, explainable, or if not explainable, its horror is merely part of a greater horror. Because the problem is, of course, in the world of events, in the world where we are gathered up into centres whose resolution does not lie in this world, who are literally like black holes, which is what events are. They have no truth as such, merely this way of swirling us up, of gathering us into their horror, into what they are, into how we understand them, the this at then. As we are gathered up in there, we are caught up in a maelstrom of feelings, of counter feelings. Now, this then becomes, if you like, the way that truth exists in the post-truth society. It exists as events. Events that are real enough, that have a date and that have a time, that we're all caught up in, but that we are all part of and react as different parts of, all moves within, all distorting our space and time before we ever knew it was distorted. In such a world, humans find difficult to grasp. We would really rather like the world to be as we perceive it to be, in terms of things. And of course, take precautions to avoid too problematic events. Try to keep hold of our sanity. Deleuze also says as much. What we try to keep ourselves, then he would say, is stratified. What we try to keep ourselves is as simple, as not floating upon the events of the world, able to be changed by them. And of course, how you do that is your values. You dig down to a value-based truth. But of course, that which exists, I suppose I would say, as the counterpoint of the event-based truth, its opposite, its reflection, is very, very difficult, because the mechanics of values and the mechanics of reality, they don't even need to pretend to be related. We might easily, therefore, demand change when no change is possible. We might easily demand that this simple truth must be realised, and not realise that getting rid of immigrants would destroy our entire healthcare system, or think that we don't care, or somehow that our value means that it does not matter. What value does is to cut through, I suppose, the sheer complexity of events that exist only in the middle for another, only as they catch us up within them. It cuts through then the complexity of the world, the sheer interrelation, and says, no, 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 no. There are certain values that must be said, and we must cut. And then those cuts become a different event, but they also become their own kind of untruth, a way of cutting through reality that cannot work. And that, of course, is the world of the far-right party. But you might argue it is the world of the populist party, because I catch people who should know better saying just as much, asserting simple value over abilities, over the reality of the world, and demanding cloud compelling, if you like, those values find their goal. And of course, the danger of all values is that they get flipped terribly easily from by events. One has had, I don't know if you have had, I've had a few friends who used to be so left-wing suddenly flip on their values as they're caught up. Yes, you could say it in a pipeline. Yes, as I said yesterday, they're caught up in a certain delinquency spiral. They're bred to be a certain kind of delinquent. So yes, all that. But yes, also they're gathered up in events and shot out, so that their one set of values, their one set of feelings are by events flipped over and become the other set of values, the other set of feelings. There is then a real tension, a real ricochet between events and the values that we try to have in the face of events to assert our own truth. Events always win. Black holes always win in the end. There is no escape velocity. But the amount of damage one can do to the world as one tries to cloud compel and to escape cannot easily be comprehended. To live then in a world where AI is making up things is to live in a world not sheerly of lies. That is too simple. But it is to live in a world where two things are true. On the first hand, there are events, some of which may never have happened, into which we gathered. The events that demand us to react, to be part of them, witness them in some way or other. And how and who and what you are is defined by how you respond to those events. Likewise, cutting across such events is our own assertion of value, because in a world where all truth becomes infinitely complicated, we have a great tendency simply to assert our own identity through our own values. Now, you want my advice, I suppose, in any dystopia, is to match your values with events. To understand then how events can make you value humans all the more, value the world we actually live in all the more. You use events then to transform your values, and so that they actually become useful for your fellow humanity, so they don't make you scared. So events don't terrify you, so that you're not constantly looking out and wondering who you need to crush. Because it is only in doing that that you can open up your mind to think about how things could be different. How the self-same event that might hold you down now could allow a world to change. Because they always could. They don't have their own truth like that. To live in a post-truth society is to live in a society where actually a dystopia could be flipped to a utopia. As long as we don't despair too much, as long as we listen and understand, see where the power comes down, see how the values that are being driven, all those values of hate, are nested into the events, and then see if it is possible to use those events to flip those values into dreams.